Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Basketball Conference, the ACC Football Podcast. My name is Joey Weaver. He is Mike McDaniel. Mike, team previews rolling on. We're talking about the Duke Blue Devils today. Tell us who we got.
Steve Wiseman, Duke beat writer, friend of the show. Steve, how's it going?
It's going well. Good to be back with you guys again. We have a different way to talk about Duke football than we did a year ago, don't we?
Very different situation. Yeah, and really we can start there. Obviously we jump into year two under Mike Elko. Year one went, I think, pretty unqualified success, you would say. Duke goes 9-4, finishes second in the Coastal Division, RIP. They go to the Military Bowl and get a win there. Elko wins Coach of the Year in the ACC. I mean, it was an incredible showing. I think a team that had fairly low expectations. I was curious to kind of get your take on it, Steve, because part of that low expectations coming in was this feeling of things had really, really sputtered out at the end of the Cutcliffe era. Did you feel like the immediate jump in production? I mean, there wasn't a lot of roster turnover. Was it a coaching and scheme thing that was really improved, or was there really just more motivation, engagement, that kind of thing from the players that were in place?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of the same players. So you have to look directly at coaching and really like the strength and conditioning staff. A lot of the work they did in the off season, they talked a lot about it, but then all staffs talk about that, right? We're working hard in the weight room. We're challenging them here. But then you see them on the field in practice when it started last August and then in the season, and they were stronger. They were better that way. They took care of the ball tremendously. A complete 180 from as far as not turning the ball over and then getting turnovers. They went from one of the worst turnover margins to the best, and that has to go right to coaching. There's just no other way around that. And I think maybe we underestimated how bad, what a bad impact the pandemic had on Duke as a program. I mean, they really got behind those 2 years, and obviously, even without the pandemic, I mean, I think it was about time for a coaching change anyway, right? It had been long enough, and they kind of petered out and kind of started back in a bad trend. But getting out of that and getting back into full, off-season work mode that they had been out of for 2 years before that really made such a huge difference. And again, a year ago, Mike Elko had never been a head coach at any level before, so he's going into his first game. He'd never done that before, so we had no idea what kind of head coach he was going to be. Well, it turns out, like when it came time to vote for ACC Coach of the Year, it was the easiest decision on any ballot I've ever had in my life. Because who else, what he did from a 13-game losing streak in ACC play, to go into 8-4 in the regular season and beating UCF in the Military Bowl, he did a great job.
Big reason why he did a great job was he found a quarterback. Riley Leonard ran for about 700 yards, had 13 touchdowns, led the ACC in terms of quarterback rushing yards. He was a really good passer as well, like a bona fide dual threat player for Duke, all ACC player. His emergence was a huge reason why Duke ended up where they were last year. It's going to be tough to kind of replicate that now, I assume, because everybody's going to be more prepared for Riley Leonard in year two. But what's Mike Elko and his staff and their belief in Leonard as their quarterback moving forward? Because year one, I mean, he was fantastic.
He was, and it took him, if you remember, like 2 weeks into camp before he was named the starter. He was battling with Jordan Moore, and then he won the job, and then they moved Jordan Moore to wide receiver, which turned out to be a great move. He ended up catching 60 passes and had a really strong year. But Riley is far and away, he's the guy. I mean, there's no doubt he's their quarterback. He's proven that, and did a great job last year. So now the thing is, he knows the playbook even more. He knows he's deeper into the playbook than he was a year ago because it was so new, and he wasn't the starter until 2 weeks before. So they've had a whole offseason to do that. He's going to have more freedom to audible at the line of scrimmage, and that'll be something to watch, that they believe he's worthy of that. He proved it last year that he knows enough to do it. That could be a double-edged sword, right? We could see mistakes happen. So I'm going to watch that early in the year, especially, and we'll get to the schedule later, but when you open it with Clemson, like, if you have a problem, it's going to be exposed pretty darn quick. Right. So we'll see. But Riley, will be a dual threat guy. He'll be, he'll still run when the opportunity's there. I'm not sure they want him to lead the team in rushing again. They'd rather have some of those running backs, carrying the ball and keeping Riley out of danger. but that doesn't mean he's not going to break free when he can. And he has to continue to complete 65% of his passes like he did last year, and then they'll be just fine.
If something were to happen injury-wise with Leonard, do you think that they would go back to Jordan Moore potentially, or is he full-time wide receiver at this point, and it would be Henry Boleyn or someone else coming in to sub for Leonard?
Yeah, it would be Henry. Jordan is full-time wide receiver, and they actually, I guess it was last September after they got into a couple of games, they told us, yeah, Jordan's not, it'll be Henry if Raleigh would have hurt last year. So it's even more so this year. And Henry Boleyn has made a lot of progress too. I mean, he really wasn't ready to play last year, obviously. It would have had to, but he played high school football in New York City. And, you don't get the kind of coaching there that you do in other parts of the country, right? I mean, it's not a high school football hotbed area. And there were a lot of things about the mechanics of playing quarterback he needed to hone. And they've been able to work with him a lot on that in the last year. So he's far more prepared to play now than he would have been last year.
Duke was a bit running back by committee last year. And, it proved effective. Jordan Waters, Shaka Heyward, Jalen Coleman all had, pretty strong campaigns. And when you kind of lump them together, I mean, it ended up being a pretty productive running back room. Does it kind of look the same going into this year? Is there one back that stands out as kind of the guy heading into the year? Or do you think it'll be looking a lot like it did a year ago?
I think it'll look like it did a year ago, and that's not really to plan because, we talked to Kevin Johns, the offensive coordinator, in the spring and then when camp started this year, and he said he kind of wanted somebody to emerge, somebody to be the guy, right? And we just talked to him just a few days ago, and he said that hasn't happened. I don't know if that's good or bad. I mean, you've got three pretty good backs, and then there's a freshman named Peyton Jones, who they think is going to be really, really good by the time he's done at Duke. But so he'll get some carries this year. He'll be involved some way, even though he's a true freshman. They'll not use the red shirt for him. So again, that's another depth thing. They got four guys they think can carry the ball and get the job done. So that's why I think they want those guys to get more rushing yards than Riley, get more attempts, and maybe a little bit less for Riley as far as called plays and everything.
As you look at this roster, Steve, and you think about it both offense and defense, is there any one particular area that if this team has a calling card, has a real strength, where would I find that?
Well, I guess we just talked about running back, but I think it's there, and we just broke that down pretty good. So when you got four backs like that that you think can play a lot, I know they like their offensive line. They have three starters back, and then they have two or three guys that have transferred from other schools. Hornibrook's going to get a lot of playing time. Brian Parker's going to get a lot of playing time. Those guys in the interior, they're bringing back, like I said, three starters, and then Justin Pickett was also a starter. Mo McIntyre was hurt some last year, but he's back. So I count him as a returning starter, even though he's hurt halfway through the year. So you got a lot of guys that started a lot of games at offensive line. And, of course, when you got a returning quarterback like they do and you got these running backs, if your offensive line is ready to go, you're going to put some points on the board. So I think that's where they're the strongest, are those positions.
I want to ask about defensive coordinator because Rob Smith left. Going into the year, Elko hires a 34-year-old Tyler Santucci, and I'm interested kind of in what went into that hire. And obviously Santucci is an up-and-coming coach, but what went into that hire for Elko, replacing Smith, who obviously came in and Duke's defense instantly improved because this was a really bad unit in 2021, and they played so much better last year.
Night and day difference, just like we talked about the turnovers and stuff, right? The defense. And, of course, Rob Smith gets some credit for that. Elko is a defensive guy.
Right.
He gets a lot of credit for that, too. But so Santucci worked with Elko at Texas A&M before Elko came to Duke last year. And Santucci had also been at Wake Forest before that, although he and Elko didn't cross paths there, but they're a little different timing. But anyway, he knows the ACC. He is a young guy, and this has become – right, we're seeing a lot of younger coordinators, aren't we? Head coaches even are in their 30s. So he knows what Elko wants to do on defense. They feel they're very comfortable with the schemes and all that. He's not trying to come in and change everything what was done. He knows, Elko has what he wants done, and he knows how to institute it. So I think we'll see a lot. I don't think those would be a lot different than last year. I think the only thing different would be, they are better able to do some exotic blitzing and things like that. Where last year, as they were putting this in, they still didn't know what they had as far as talent, and they were worried about leaving guys on the island, to gamble with that to make a big play on defense, right? With the blitzing. So now they feel like they've got a better handle on what they have talent wise, and guys are more familiar with the system. There won't be as many mistakes made, right? When you blitz, if somebody screws up something on the other side of the field, you're going to give up 6, right? So they feel better about that.
How does Elko feel in terms of having Santucci call plays? And the reason why I ask is because I'm a Virginia Tech alum, and I watched Brent Pry not give the keys over to first-year defensive coordinator Chris Marv a year ago. Pry was calling the defense. Now in year 2, he's taking a step back. He's not calling the defense anymore. He says, Marv, you got full control. What's going to be Elko's level of involvement, I guess, with a young defensive coordinator and in his first big-time spot here?
Yeah, I want to see how that goes. Actually, he said, it's your deal, man. You run this, and Elko's been a really good people person. That's how he's gotten this far in his career, and so he seems like a guy that when he gives you that word, he's going to stick by it. Now, he's also involved in a lot of things, and if things start going haywire, he might have to step in, right? Because he obviously knows how to do this. So that remains to be seen. But as of now, it looks like Santucci's going to be free to call the plays.
Steve, I wanted to go back. Something that you mentioned with the offensive line transfers that I was kind of intrigued by. And I'll say this. If you're anything like me, it has gotten really difficult in college football to figure out who's on what team at what time with the transfer portal activity and the volume and everything that's gone on. So the really useful tool that I always use is the 24/7 Sports transfer portal tracker. And I'm looking at this for Duke in particular, and this might be inaccurate, but from what I'm seeing, Duke lost 6 transfers on the offensive line and brought in 7. To you, was that a concerted effort anywhere? And the guys that transferred in, I mean, are they expected to be starters or just sort of depth bodies, help you get through practice, that kind of thing?
Right. So like Jake Hornibrook from Stanford is slotted to come in and be a starter. So the idea was, let's cycle them out and get better people in here. That's the way the world is now in college football. It's more like NFL free agency with the transfer portal situation. So, I mean, Elko did and the staff did all they could with what they inherited last year. And this year it was like, okay, now we're going to ratchet this up. Now we know what we can do. Let's get some better players in here. And so that was the point on offensive line. And they wanted more experienced guys. They weren't really happy with some of the young guys that were here. As you saw some transfers happen that the other staff brought in. So, Hornibrook's going to start and play a lot for sure. I think I mentioned Scott Elliott. I think I may have said Brian, but I meant Scott. Scott Elliott is getting some reps at center. Because Jacob Monk was a center at a guard last year. They may use Elliott at center. Justin Pickett, a returning starter last year, has been kind of nicked up during camp, so that gives Monk the ability to play over at guard. So that's what that depth has brought them.
As far as weakness of the roster, if there is one, because I think Elko's kind of ratcheted things up pretty quickly, but linebacker group, Shaka Heyward's gone to the NFL, and he was a very productive player in that linebacking core last year. Would that be seen as a weakness, or is that maybe just a depth concern? Or, how's Elko and company feeling about the linebacker group?
It is certainly the biggest area of concern as far as I think the coaching staff feels that way. And and Santucci's the linebackers coach, by the way. So it's going to be on him.
Yeah.
Pressure's
Welcome
on.
to the ACC.
Right. Yeah. Pressure's on. Yeah. No kidding.
Right. There you go. You lose you're one of the best tacklers you had in the program for 2 or 3 years, Shaka Heyward, and you got to replace that. But right now, Dorian Mossy returned from last year. He's playing quite a bit. Trey Freeman, Cam Dillon came in from Columbia last year as a transfer and ended up being a starter by the end of the year and started the bowl game and played really well. He's just he's not going to be an NFL guy. He's just a smart college football player that knows where to be on the field. So they have a little bit of depth there, but to me it's a concern because you're losing the big guy, right? You've got and Mossy has been in and out of the lineup through his career. Trey Freeman is the young guy; he's a sophomore, played a lot as a freshman last year, but I think he's due for a step up. But again, they have to do it. So yeah, I'm worried there, especially if there's injury, that the depth behind those guys. You're getting into some really young guys at linebacker, and again, I know we're gonna talk about the schedule. I keep saying that, but boy, that schedule is not going to be forgiving. So you can't have any problems there with linebacker.
Let's take a quick second to remind you about Section103.com. It is the internet's premier place for all things wonderful, wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. They have t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies. They got a couple of three-quarter shirts. They got buttons, stickers, all sorts of things. Things for men, women, children, something for the whole family. Every Georgia Tech fan in your life can use something from Section103.com. Use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. They've got some new things all the time coming. Recently came out with some new player shirts, jerseys, I guess as the kids would call them. Things with a logo on the front, a number on the front, and a number on the back, along with a name. They got shirts for both Zach Pyron as well as Dante Smith, who kind of project to be Georgia Tech's starting quarterback and running back this year. So if you want to support those players, I believe they get some NIL money out of it too. So just keep that in mind for what it's worth. They've got the Juniors Grill shirt. They've got all sorts of great products there. They've also recently come out with a clearance section. So if you're looking for some t-shirts or a couple of hoodies for a slightly lower price point, go check out the clearance section. Once again, it is section103.com or at section_103 on Instagram. Give them a follow. Check it out. All things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. Again, using the official team colors, the official word marks, everything. It is all officially licensed. It is super comfortable, super high quality. I love mine. You will love yours as well. Check out the performance wear if you're looking for things to keep you cool here during the summer. In any case, one more time, that is section103.com, the internet's best place for all things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. That's it for now. Let's get back to the show. Right. Anywhere else on the team? You mentioned depth concerns with linebacker. Is there anywhere else I'd be looking at that if option number one goes down, that we got a real problem here? Or
outside quarterback
might have a big problem?
Outside of quarterback.
Yeah, right. Quarterback, obviously,
Yeah.
You know that, right? Yeah. They've already had an injury at wide receiver. They had Eli Pancole came back. He's got a leg injury. He had surgery already. And he's not likely to play this year. They're not saying he's out for the year, but it's going to be most, if not all, the season. And that's a veteran guy they had counted on, thinking they were going to be okay there, right, with he and Jalen Calhoun and Jordan Moore. So Samir Hagens was probably going to – I think he probably would have won the starting job anyway. They wanted him to, even if Eli didn't get hurt. But so now you take Eli out of the mix. Now Hagens does have to start, right? So then behind that, you're looking at some freshmen maybe. They'll get some playing time in there. Mekhi Wall might have to play. So, yeah, you're getting thin pretty quick at a position where you have a lot of experienced guys that are starters.
The schedule, Steve. So we were team.
Here we go.
Here
we go.
Joey, unless you have anything to add here before.
No. I like this nice, easy little runway you get into the schedule with a nice confidence builder to start off.
I was going to say a nice up and coming program that certainly has not had any sort of success over the last decade. Oh, Clemson.
Clemson on Monday Night Football, right?
Yeah.
The whole country is going to be watching, from Wallace Wade Stadium. It's something. It's it's different than last year. They opened with Temple.
Little
so just think of the difference. And I've been at enough practices this camp in August. Clemson, it's mentioned a lot. Like they're not one of those, we're preparing for this like any other team. No, it's, hey, if you do that against Clemson, they're going to knock you in the stands. You know what I'm saying? So you better do this drill the right way. So it's been a good motivator.
And I feel like the month of September after that game does get pretty forgiving until Duke, of course, hosts Notre Dame at the end of the month. I mean, Lafayette's an FCS school. Yeah. Northwestern, they got plenty of their own issues.
They're a mess.
Right.
Yeah.
On the road at UConn. I mean, UConn had a decent bounce back year last year. Mora did a pretty good job in year one, but that's a game Duke should win. This Clemson game, though, off the top, it's just not an easy way, obviously, to start the year. That kind of goes without saying, but it feels like there's not really any sort of room for error once you get past that first 4 weeks of the season. The schedule gets real tough real quick.
It does. September, they have 5 September games, which is, how about that? That's almost half of your schedule.
Right.
It's all in September. How about that? and two of them are Notre Dame and Clemson, who could be, potential playoff teams, right? I mean, if things go, they have the potential to do it,
Right,
I'm trying
of
to say.
course.
So that's a tough deal. Yeah, you do get that little soft part in the middle of September, where you should be able to pick up some wins. But then after that, October gets even more brutal, where you have Florida State at NC State, and then Florida State Louisville on the road, and then you get in November, and then you have Wake Forest and Carolina. So yeah, it's a challenge. It's okay, Elko. You did a great job last year. You racked up a lot of wins against teams that didn't end up with winning records, right? Until the end, you beat Wake and Central or UCF. So all props to that. But this is a whole different level, no doubt about it.
Out of conference wise, when you see the Northwestern and on the road against UConn, is that something you would expect that they're at least splitting those games, or do you think the expectation internally is that they need to be winning both of those games, especially considering everything else that comes later on the schedule?
Yeah, they need to get both of those. There's no doubt about it because of what else they have. If they want to get back to a bowl game, and the path to 6 wins, which is what everybody's striving for to get back to a bowl game, is you got to have those three non-conference wins, and then find 3 conference wins in that pretty brutal schedule. Which Virginia is really the only game you look at like that they've got that's a win, right? I mean, you just
Even that's on the road.
look at it that way. Yeah. That's right. That's on the road, and then you got Pittsburgh. So it's a tough stretch, man. It's a tough haul, and they do have Pitt at home, but they've had trouble with him lately. So yeah, even though it's at Virginia, that they're going to be so bad that's a game you have to win. So you're only looking at 4 wins there, right? When you start plotting out what their record might be, and then you have a bunch of swing games, and games they won't be favored in, right? But they played Carolina to the end last year. They should be competitive with them. NC State should be a toss-up. It's at home, even though they're a pretty good team. The ones you go into and you don't expect to win maybe are Clemson, Notre Dame, Florida State. Wake Forest will be a swing game since they beat them last year. Pitt, I have to lean toward Pitt because they haven't beat them in a long time, right? So the path to 6 is getting tough.
Yeah.
Right off the bat.
Well, I look at this, and Joey and I actually did a Louisville preview last night. We just recorded it. We talked to Mark Ennis from 93.9 The Ville. What we discussed with him is Louisville, on paper this year, from a roster standpoint, they're really not too much different than they were a year ago. Obviously, Malik Cunningham's gone, right, and they have to replace quarterback, and they have a new coaching staff. But like on paper, they don't really look too much different than they did a year ago, but their schedule is extremely forgiving. This is the opposite, where I think Duke is probably a more talented team than Louisville in terms of certainty with the quarterback. We know what we're getting with Elko. Braum is coming from a spot in the Big Ten where he did well at Purdue, but it's Purdue, and your success is measured a little bit differently. He was a 6 or 7 win coach at Purdue. This seems a little bit different, where Duke's got one of the toughest schedules, if not the toughest schedule in the ACC. And I could see a scenario here where Duke obviously has a worse record than they did a year ago, but could be fielding a similar team. And this is tough because, I mean, you mentioned the 3 games in September: Lafayette, Northwestern, UConn, the game against UVA on November 18th. Those are the 4 wins that you look at on paper. And then the swing games in October, I think, really dictate whether or not this team's going to make a bowl game, right? NC State, I think, is a winnable game, but a tough game. Luckily for Duke, they're coming off of a bye, and they get NC State at home. At Florida State's obviously tough. At Louisville's a tough game because, like Joey and I have mentioned on a couple of these previews, where you're getting Louisville on the schedule is pretty important. Like if you're getting them in September, year 1, new coach, new quarterback, that might be the time to get them versus like late October, early November, where it's like, all right, they might be hitting their stride a little bit. So that's a tough game, and it's on the road. Wake Forest, no Sam Hartman. What does that look like with Mitch Griffiths? At UNC, you mentioned the shootout last year. I mean, Duke could have easily won that game. Leonard almost single-handedly got into that win. That was unbelievable how he played in that game last year.
Yeah.
And then Pitt's a real tough game. I think I'm just going to throw my record prediction out there, and I'll open the floor to you guys. I think Duke gets to 6. I do. I saw enough out of Elko last year to know that he's a competent coach in the ACC. He can coach up a defense. Obviously, replacing a defensive coordinator and having to have more of a hand in the defense, maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. I don't know. But I don't expect Duke to take this giant step back defensively now. I think they'll be good on defense. And I think Leonard is a good enough quarterback. I think he's proven that with all his skill guys back. Offensive line depth that maybe they didn't have a year ago as far as like proven depth. You're bringing in a bunch of guys who have played snaps elsewhere. I just think that Duke's roster is good enough to get to 6 wins and pick up a couple of the swing games. I can't tell you which ones they're going to be, but I think they pick up a couple of those swing games in October, probably lose to Clemson and Notre Dame and Florida State, and maybe they drop one of the ones we mentioned there late in the year that's tougher, maybe Pitt at home late in the year, or maybe they lose to Louisville. But I think they find a way to get to 6. I just think this is a team that's talented and well coached, and they have a good quarterback. That's usually a recipe to get to 6 wins in the ACC. So I'm going to go with 6-6 for Duke.
I don't want to be boring, but if you want me to go next, but that's what I've been thinking all along is 6, 5-7 or 6-6. If injuries happen, then as we all know, that's the big wild card. But I don't see a big step back from them. I think they are going to play better football than they did last year. It's just who they're playing. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Yep.
And so it's hard for me to look at it and find. I mean, they could win 7. You're right. There are some swing games in there that if they can beat Carolina and Wake, and Louisville, right? Then we already talked about those other 4.
7.
Then you got 7 wins. Yeah, right there. And I'm kind of leaning toward the 6 range is what I'm kind of being safe with. And if you go back and play this tape from last year, I think I said 4. So I was way off last year. Way off.
A lot of people were.
Of course, I think everybody was, right? Yeah, I wasn't alone in that. But I was thinking 3 or 4 last year would be a good start. And then, boy, he got 8 and then, the bowl game. So, I think they're
4.
looking at 6.
4 losses.
Right. Exactly.
I'm with you, Steve. I think I'm going to say 6-6. I was leaning towards 5-7, just looking at the schedule and seeing, just the week in, week out grind of it. But there is also this thing, and I've been doing this with Wake Forest in recent years and a couple of coaching staffs, where it's like, I feel like what I saw was good from a coaching standpoint. I feel like that's going to earn them a win somewhere where they might be an underdog, but they'll win a game that they maybe, quote unquote, shouldn't, on paper or whatever. So at that point, I agree with you. I think 6-6 is right. That's what I'll take. It's funny, to that point, I'm curious to get your take on this, Steve. Is I thought about last year's team and the way that we described them on this podcast, and me in particular, was like, I don't know if there was any one thing that this team is exceptional at, but I do think that they are aggressively competent. They do not beat themselves. They are well coached. They play smart football. And, in the ACC, as we've said, I mean, that'll win you a lot of games.
It will, yeah. We're not talking about, the SEC, right? We're not talking about conferences like that. You can be that's a good way to put it, aggressively competent. I like that. And it's the exact opposite of what they were the last 2 years under the old staff, right? They beat themselves all the time. They didn't never give themselves a chance to win. And then last year, I kept thinking, okay, they're a little better in September. And then as the year went on, they just kept playing that way. They started taking advantage of other teams' mistakes. And that's how they beat Wake Forest in the last game of the regular season, which they hadn't beat Wake for a long time. So that was a special win for them. So yeah, they put themselves in position to pull some upsets, and they don't seem to lose games they shouldn't. They did last year to Georgia Tech. I know that was a close game in overtime. But mostly they got things done against teams they should have. So that's the floor for a successful program.
And with this new ACC scheduling model, it'll probably work in their favor next year very, very well, I would imagine.
Yes.
Mike, that's all I got. Anything else for Steve while we got him?
I don't think so, Steve. We appreciate you coming on. Of course, every year you're always very willing to join us. We appreciate that. Let the people know where you can find your stuff.
Yeah, covered Duke at news.observer.com. That's the Raleigh News-Observer in North Carolina. You can find all our stuff there. And then on Twitter, I'm at Steve Wiseman NC for North Carolina, Steve Wiseman NC. You can follow all my stuff there for not only football, but obviously we get into Duke basketball. And I know this is a football podcast. We'll have plenty to talk about basketball too when it comes to Duke as usual. But yeah, that's where all my stuff can be found.
Steve, you're the man. Really appreciate your time here today.
All right, Joey and Mike, glad to be with you.
All right, Mike, let's get out of here. We got a few more team previews to wrap up. Let's come back and do those. In the meantime, you can find us on Twitter. I'm at FTRS Joey. He's at Mike McDaniel SI, together at BC Podcast ACC. Or once again, go find Mr. Steve Wiseman at Steve Wiseman NC on Twitter, X, or whatever we're calling it these days, for all things wonderful Duke coverage, football and beyond. If you're one of those people that might be more interested in Duke basketball than football, he's got that too. So go check that out. Could be anybody. I don't know. Mike, we're on iTunes, we're on Spotify. Anywhere you can go find your podcast, please do. Send us emails with questions, comments, concerns to the longest email address known to man, basketballconferencepodcast@gmail.com.
Nailed it.
Thank you. Where else are we on the social medias?
Facebook.com/basketballconference. Rate, review, find most of our podcasts there. Instagram at BC Podcast ACC. Our YouTube page at the ACC Football Podcast at the end.
Please do. I think that's it. Anything else before we get out of here, Mike?
I think we're all set.
You want to come back and finish up these team previews?
We are almost done.
So close. We're so close. And then it'll be actual football. Can't wait.
Yes.
All right. Well, until next time, for Mr. Mike McDaniel and Mr. Steve Wiseman, I am Joey Weaver. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will talk to you again soon. And until next time, go Duke and go ACC.